All right, and you ready now? All right. Call the meeting to order. It's July 17th, 2024, Planning Commission, 6 p.m. local time. Roll call, Megan, please.
John Marshall,
Here.
Seth Clark,
Present.
Jim Bell,
Here.
Jerry Bainey,
Present.
Councilor Layman, Mayor Bell,
And Marissa is just walking in.
thank you for capturing that. And William Wood
I am here.
is present via Zoom. Absent are we have a quorum. Also present is special guest Patrick Wingard from DLCD.
All right, agenda review. Are there any changes from the commission? If not, we'll move on to the approval of the minutes, and we have a backlog of minutes going from March to April to May. I would entertain a motion for approval of all three unless there's some major change to take place.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes for maybe March 20th and April 7th and May 15th as stated.
Is there a second for said motion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Comments? Approved. Any public comments this evening, Megan?
We have no one signed up for public comment.
If that's the case, we'll move on to commission business where we have a guest speaker from LCOG, Patrick Wingard. Yes, from LCD.
Yes, good evening, Chair Bell, members of the Covert Planning Commission. My green light is on now. I'm Patrick Wingard. I'm your friendly regional representative with the Department of Land Conservation Development. I live in Springfield. We're the state land use agency. So it's really a pleasure to be here tonight. I've got a presentation for you. Please interrupt me at any time. I generally do 3 or 4 of these around the region for me, which includes Benton, Lynn, and Lane counties. This one's a little different and a little exciting for me because I got to spend some time in your zoning code. But it's land use decision making for planning commissioners, elected officials, and planners, including your master plan development application and procedures. Megan, do you want me to click or?
No,
Okay.
I just was going to give everyone a little reminder that at the beginning of the year when we established goals for the commission for this year, the commission had asked for a training specific to the master plan development process because that is what will be used when the 107 acres of newly annexed light industrial land is ready to develop. And so this is kind of in preparation for what we know is somewhere on the horizon.
Thanks, Megan. Okay, well, we can move into the presentation. And we have to start with a little history. So the top picture is Governor McCall in 1967 in Cannon Beach, taking a look at some stakes that a motel owner had put into the dry sand, claiming that that was theirs and theirs alone. And that was problematic for the state of Oregon in a couple different ways. The state declared all the public beaches to be a highway in 1910, give or take. And that was very helpful for Governor McCall and the legislature in the early 1970s to declare to pass the public beach bill and declare all of our beaches open to the public, which continues to this day to be, I think, one of the paramount successes for Oregon. But the legislature in 1919 began to move forward with some land use policies and decisions. In the 40s, the legislature allowed counties to begin to zone private land. And what we've learned in our research, it was really focused on farmland. And sure enough, in 1963, the legislature established the exclusive farm use zone and the uses it allows. And before the meeting, Madam Mayor and Megan and Chair Bell, we were just chatting about the importance of those exclusive farm use zones as they provide a buffer between you all and the metro area just to the south. Yes.
What does it exactly mean to zone private land?
Well, it means to apply controls to the land that are for the public good. And zoning comes with the enforcement of police power behind it. And so it needs to advance a legitimate public interest, usually in our case in Oregon on exclusive farm use zoning, ensuring that you can't allow conflicting uses, usually houses, in and around farmland, unless it's a farmhouse or farm worker home, to avoid conflicts and to allow industry, the agricultural industry, to prosper. So that's what it would mean to apply zoning to a private property. All right. Yeah, good question. All right.
Oh, that's a good answer too.
In 1973, so 51 years ago, Senate Bill 100 was passed and our conservation, the Land Conservation Development Commission, was created. And the legislature charged our commission with adopting the first 14 statewide planning goals, which became effective in 1975. And those planning goals range from citizen involvement, agriculture, forestry, natural resources, public facilities, housing, transportation. As planners, Megan and I, we're generalists. We like to dabble like mayors and sometimes planning commissioners. We have interest in a lot of different items, and we try to be honest brokers so that applicants have a fair shake at pursuing their economic or conservation interests. And then the governing body, the planning commission, city and county officials are able to help guide that development through your adopted comprehensive plans and your zoning codes. So in 1976 through 1986, our commission acknowledged, I think it's 237 city and county comprehensive plans around the state. Your comprehensive plan was acknowledged by the state in December 9th, 1982. And you'll hear that term acknowledgement quite a bit from state officials, particularly my colleagues at Department of Land Conservation Development. Acknowledgement means it's gone through a public process. Typically, the Planning Commission makes a recommendation up to the Board of Commissioners for counties, City Council or City Commission for cities, and it's adopted by ordinance. So that's important because we have a legacy that we want to protect. So folks will often criticize, and Chair and Mayor, you may have had some of these criticisms. Why is it so hard to change this? Why do things have to take so long? Well, that's on purpose because it matters to us what people in the 1950s and 1980s and the 2000s and even before that had to say and what their plans and visions meant. Sure, things change over time, but we want to make sure that we honor those decisions that have been made to build, for example, a fantastic city that I'm so sorry I have to take you away from your festival tonight, but hopefully you can catch the tail end of it. But you're a great example of a city that works, a city that is vibrant and provides a really high quality of life for your residents. So really good on you. So just really quickly, the state's responsibility, and it really is a shared responsibility between the state and cities and counties. We would not have a statewide planning program but for city and county comprehensive plans, zoning codes, development codes. So the state sets land use policy predominantly through our Land Conservation Development Commission, but sometimes through rulemaking efforts like we've seen recently with some of the housing work. The governor has taken action through executive order and directed agency directors to do certain things that the legislature wasn't able to accomplish, and really largely upon figuring out ways to increase housing production. That's really been a focus for us for quite a few years. recently. Again, we acknowledge the Department of Land Conservation Development and our commission. We acknowledge city and county comprehensive plans, and we enforce the statewide planning goals. That's part of my responsibility when a city or county proposes an amendment to its acknowledged zoning code or comprehensive plan. You're required, Megan's required to send us a 35-day notice, and that gives us an opportunity to take a look at it. And if we support it, it's great. If we find that there's some gaps in the proposals, we'll let the local government know, provide guidance, and in some cases, we'll go on record, become an interested party, and then could pursue avenues through appeals. Yes, Chair.
Patrick, I got a quick question.
You bet.
You used the word acknowledge a couple of times
Yeah.
here. So that is different than approve, right?
Well, they're synonymous.
Okay.
But in our world, in the state statutes and administrative rules, acknowledgement means approved through the state. No, I guess approved through the local government, acknowledged by the state. If there's a nuance there.
Thank you.
So when you don't acknowledge it, that means the fact that you don't like it and disapprove and you have to go back to the table? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Disacknowledge it?
So for example, this happens, cities or counties will go through a public hearing process, adopt an ordinance, and then forget to send us notice. Then 2 or 3 years later, there's an application and it becomes contentious. And maybe there are land use attorneys and they discover that, oh, the city's operating with an unacknowledged plan or plan amendment from a few years ago. So we get called in and our response is, yeah, the city can't use that. That needs to be acknowledged. And the acknowledgement process concludes when a notice is sent to us and all appeal periods are exhausted. When that final notice isn't sent to us, it can be a problem. And I've worked in a couple communities where that has reared its ugly head. And in fact, you all probably remember some of the liquefied natural gas proposals on the coast. I was embedded in the one in Clatsop County. I was the planning manager there. And we discovered that several of our ordinances in the 1990s were never acknowledged. And so we ended up having to make dual findings against the current code and findings against the acknowledged code to cover our bases. So yeah, great question. And it's synonymous with approval, but carries much more weight when acknowledged.
Thank you.
We administer periodic review requirements. The periodic review program is spelled out in state statute and in law, but really is not used any longer because of cost and frankly, political will. It was a process that I was engaged in 20 years ago as a local government planner. And it was very challenging to convince planning commissioners, elected officials that they needed to do something because the state felt like it was important, and it really caused turmoil, and that program has more or less gone away. Although cities and counties sometimes will voluntarily opt into periodic review. Benton County is looking at doing that. And frankly, if you opt into periodic review, it comes with some requirements where you would adopt a work program. It would go up to our commission. The commission would ratify the work program. And then you'd have to go through the process of, say, updating your natural resource plan and inventory and code. But it does put you at the front of line for grants. I will say that. So keep that in mind. So like everything, there's a carrot and a stick, right? And then one of our final responsibilities, something that I probably do the most of in my job, is provide technical assistance, provide guidance on how to implement all the vast rules in the big, huge box of land use planning that we have here in Oregon that, you know, Megan and other planners and you all have the joy of trying to implement when you have 20 and 30 and 500 pages of ordinances sometimes to go through. That's my job. So cities and counties, you all adopt your comprehensive plans and zoning codes in compliance with the statewide planning goals. You can think of the statewide planning goals as a framework, the sideboards, if you will, that you can operate within. You establish a vision. You guys have in here in Coburg done a great job of always keeping your vision current and contemporary and relevant for your citizens, for your constituents. You make land use decisions. You enforce your codes and ordinances, and you provide assistance to the public. That's predominantly the city and county role in the relationship for the statewide planning goal or program. Here's just a little diagram that shows how your local decisions are informed, again, down through the statutes and the statewide planning goals. You have administrative rules. Administrative rules sit underneath statutes. Statutes are laws. Rules are rules. So you really got to pay attention to the laws. The rules are where I think attorneys and others have a lot of fun trying to find the gray areas. Not to say that the statutes aren't always explicitly clear, because sometimes they aren't. But most importantly, you adopt comprehensive plans and ordinances that implement your comprehensive plan, and then you're expected to make decisions that are consistent with your comprehensive plan, your vision, and your zoning code.
The state land use planning goals ever reviewed for amendments and changes and updating?
Yeah, do you have a specific question in mind? They are. There's a couple that are being looked at really closely right now I'd share with you, but which one?
Well,
Oh, transportation. Yeah, no, that's a good one. Yes, the transportation rules are being rewritten as a function of the climate friendly equitable communities rulemaking that's been ongoing for the past couple of years. Basically recognizing that we have a transportation system that's challenging to maintain. And if we continue to expand the transportation system, we got to figure out ways to fund it. And part of our role as the state's land use agency with urban growth boundaries, we're going to promote efficient use of land resources inside those urban growth boundaries. Let's make sure that the public's investment in public facilities in the cities is maximized before we expect cities to start serving water and sewer out into areas where it gets more costly and more expensive to build and maintain.
Outside the city.
Sure. Right. Well, I know you all have looked at that for a number of years, how to get a better east-west connector north of the city, and you butt up against Goal 12, the transportation planning rule, which forbids effectively without a goal exception. So you can take an exception. The city of Millersburg is working with Lynn County right now to take an exception to try to build a road to provide access to a phenomenal advanced wood manufacturer who wants to come into Millersburg. But Lynn County has to take an exception to Goal 12, which basically reads, rural is rural and urban is urban, and you can't go across a rural area to serve an urban use. Well, sometimes topography and other things get in the way, and you're really left with not many other choices. And so Lynn County will have to adopt findings to demonstrate that they need that road in the rural area. But I'll share with you Goal 1, citizen involvement. Just the term citizen involvement really is problematic for some folks because not everybody's a citizen, but they still live here. So that's one that we're looking at. And Goal 5, which includes natural, cultural, and historic resources. We've heard from the 9 recognized tribes here in Oregon that we've not done a great job of protecting, which is challenging because you can't divulge where these artifacts are or where these sacred sites are, often because they may get vandalized or things may get stolen. So we are working definitely on Goal 1 from a citizen involvement. How do we provide a more equitable engagement framework, allow people to participate in the planning process when maybe they're intimidated by these settings, or anybody who's undocumented, folks like that, are some of our folks that work out in the agricultural industry. How do we engage those populations so that we can build a system that is recognizable and accommodating for everybody? And that's a really loaded subject there. So I'll move on to the other cultural resources. Our 9 federally recognized tribes in Oregon have been, I think, very gracious and patient with the work that we have done to date to try to incorporate cultural resources into comprehensive plans. But from what we hear from the tribes, we have some work to do there. So, yeah, those are a couple of examples, but yours is probably the best one, Goal 12 transportation. Just really quickly, your comprehensive plan establishes a vision. It guides your land use document, your zoning code, and it provides policies and strategies on your infrastructure, development, conservation of natural resources, economic development, and other planning interests. Your comprehensive plan must include a factual basis under which the goals and policies are developed. They would provide a guide for your zoning code to implement those measures, and includes a couple of maps. Usually you have a comprehensive plan map, maybe a natural resource map, a natural hazards map. Those things are all parts of your comprehensive plan. So the way that your comprehensive plan and your vision is implemented is through your zoning code. Zoning codes provide specific regulations, such as types of uses that would be allowed in certain zoning districts, where those uses can go, setbacks, which we're all familiar with, density standards, minimum lot sizes, things like that, building heights, and those kinds of things. It also sets forth the criteria for making decisions on land use applications, like variances, conditional use permits, master plan developments. And it includes the permitting procedures and standards for land divisions or subdivisions and partitions. Okay, now we can get into your stuff. Any questions, comments on the sort of the general broad stuff? Okay.
I got a dumb question.
All right.
I took my land use class at OSU in 1978. Since that class, they've discovered that the Oregon coast is subject to severe earthquakes and tsunamis. And there have been several other discoveries since the goals and guidelines were developed. Is there ever a method of preventing high density residential on tsunami zones coming down the road?
Yeah, you bet. You bet there is. And I have worked on the tsunami issue. I raised my kids in Astoria. We lived up there for 20 years. I did some tsunami work for Department of Geology. You're right. I did some archive work as a consultant for Clatsop County, and they asked me to archive a bunch of stuff. I found a letter in 1987 from a state geologist claiming that Oregon's threat from an earthquake was much less severe than California's. We really didn't have much to worry about. And of course, that was the information we had at that time. Now, we've pushed out guidance and model codes to coastal cities to not force, but try to convince cities and counties where there's residential development that the higher density developments really shouldn't go in the riskier areas. And if they need to, then we gotta harden the access in and out. We don't like to say no to development inside urban growth boundaries. So typically our mantra is, all right, well, let's look at the access and circulation plan. How can we harden that infrastructure? Let's get that bridge seismically updated. City of Seaside is a great example of a city. The north end of Seaside is about a 30 to 40 minute at 3 miles per hour evacuation to high ground over like 3 bridges. Probably not the best place to be when the big one hits. But if you know that you don't need to wait for a siren, that the ground shaking is your call to go, you've got a good chance to get over the Neowana Creek, the Nicanicum River, and then up into the hills. So yeah, there's been quite a bit of work done on that issue. And we house in the Department of Land Conservation Development, the Oregon Coastal Management Program. And they're funded federally through NOAA predominantly. And they're doing really good work out there. But it's a scary issue. I know I've worked with fire chiefs for years, and through the 2000s, we were concerned that this threat of tsunami was going to cause people's insurance to go up or go away. Nobody would want to come to the coast. You know, motel and hotel owners were reticent to acknowledge the threat of tsunami. That's not the case today. There's a culture of preparedness and resilience on the coast, and I think it's a result of learning from what we didn't know in the 70s and 80s, and you know, owning that in the state of Oregon, and letting citizens and others who visit the state know that there is a threat, but there is a way to mitigate it, and there is a way to help keep you safe as possible, you know, if and when that big rupture occurs and then the tsunami follows.
Thanks, Patrick.
You bet. Yeah, sure.
Now we're at the coast.
Okay.
What's the state's philosophy of private owners along the coastline armoring their properties line, well, property line, whatever that term is, with huge rocks? And allowing that, and having that impact people downstream.
Yeah, that's a great question. So that's covered under statewide planning goal 18, coastal shorelands. We call those structures beachfront protective structures. And there's a magic date in statute. It's 1978. And if lands were developed before 1978, including platted as a subdivision, you are allowed to do some beachfront protect, some armoring. All the development that occurred after 1978, those properties are not eligible for armoring. So we see landscape treatments in the form of riprap get buried on people's properties. And we understand why people feel the need, obviously, to protect their properties. This is getting looked at right now. I mean, the state is going through a process. Lincoln County has probably the most conflict, Glen Eden Beach and some other areas with this issue, where a lot of motels, hotels, development occurred in the 80s and 90s. And I mean, folks didn't know, you know, in California and other places. I mean, I don't know all California's rules, but you can do some things down there you can't do in Oregon. And it butts up against that first slide I showed with Governor McCall. When people armor their lands, the erosion that ensues often means that the dry sand goes away or could go away. And so what happens to the public's right to that beach? Very, very complicated issue, but it's one that we address in policy, and then through the coastal county and city zoning codes and comprehensive plans. We try to implement again. We try to be an honest broker, and we are not going to let the entire coast be armored with concrete and riprap. So we will work with NOAA, our federal partners, and the State Department of Geology to try things like dynamic revetment, small cobbles, try to do something other than a hard solution, something that's a little bit more dynamic. And the Hatfield Marine Science Center has done some dynamic revetment, and it's working. They've done some at the South Jetty in Clatsop County, and it's working. They did that to protect some crab grounds that were near shore. And they, you know, and the fishermen were like, you know, if you armor this, it's done. That's, you know, and so I think we're more thoughtful than most in that realm. Not to say that property owners are seeing their land erode are very happy when they learn that they're not able to armor it. There are some emergency measures folks can do, but there is sort of a magic date in statute. It's 1978, where if you were built before then, or if you were platted before then, you can do certain things. But you know, a lot of development has happened since then. Sure.
Does the armoring get rid of the dry sand or cause more erosion?
Well, it depends on the littoral cell. It depends on the area. It actually could cause more sand to accrete. Clatsop County is gaining sand actually as a result, we think, of the South Jetty and then the North Jetty on the Washington side. It seems like some of the sand from Baker Beach from the state of Washington is ending up in Clatsop County. And then that will reverse. And so it would be incorrect for me to say that because I'm not a geomorphologist. I don't build or design these structures, so I want to give the engineers their due. They're not meant to accelerate erosion, but I've seen firsthand instances. One comes to mind in Tillamook County where there was some armoring done, and then the neighboring properties just said, well, we have no choice but to armor ours now. And they show us 5 years, 10 years of progression of erosion that wasn't present the 5 or 10 years prior to their neighbors riprap going in. And
What is riprap?
yeah,
What is that?
big rocks stacked on top of each other, like boulders. All right, good questions. So I will tell you that you have a very good master plan development ordinance. As your city planner, Megan Winter, at the outset explained, you will be using your master plan development ordinance because your code and some of ODOT's rules with the proximity to the interchange are going to require that as that 106 acre employment land parcel on the east side of I-5 develops, that there needs to be some thoughtful elements built into that property as it develops. You expanded your urban growth boundary in 2018. And it took a couple attempts. I think in 2014, it was appealed up to the Land Use Board of Appeals. And your strategy was to adopt a regional economic development study in need. There's a severe need for large lot industrial sites, particularly ones that are shovel ready or as shovel ready as a property can be in Oregon, because often our flat lands come with wetlands. And this property, I'm sure has some, and I know the property owner is working on those. Your master plan development is going to come into effect when there's an application made for development, but it's really set up well through your comprehensive plan when it was amended. As I mentioned, to allow this regional industrial need, the light industrial sort of category is one that captures those employment uses that often come with higher paying jobs and are different than a commercial zone, which are great too. You've got some amazing commercial enterprises here, but oftentimes it's industry that really helps pay the bills for municipalities. So you'll see in your comprehensive plan and then also down through your zoning code requirement for this property to develop at not less than 20 acres. And that was a function of your strategy to amend the urban growth boundary in 2018.
How does the requirement for a certain number of employees tied to all this? There is one. I mean, you could put a big building over there that covers 100 acres and put 2 people on a forklift. And that's it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's part of your responsibility to vet those applications. Ask those questions. It's really going to be your role. And you can ask the state for help, like Business Oregon or Economic Development Agency. You can always give me a call or Megan. Let Megan know, hey, we've got concerns about the footprint of this building, and we've got 1 employee per 2 acres. That wasn't what we thought, converting this farmland was going to be all about. Great question. I think it's something that you will get into when you review applications on your master plan development.
And Patrick, if
You
I
bet.
may just
Yeah.
add to that,
Yeah, you bet.
there has been some work front loaded in that regard, in that the uses allowed on the east side of I-5's industrial lands, there's no warehousing allowed there. And so there was some foresight in thinking about how to exclude those types of large footprints, but very few employees to try to encourage a use that would also bring a high number of quality jobs.
Great question, great response. That's exactly right.
But then, of course, we are limited because of bridge capacity and the trip count issues, which is totally out of DLCD, but links with the transportation goals.
You bet. Well, I'm becoming familiar with ODOT terms like alternate mobility targets. Right. So yeah, more to come on that. So you expanded your urban growth boundary in 2018. Oh, and you can go to the next slide, Megan. And subsequently, you annexed the property because expanding an urban growth boundary just means that that land is ready to be urbanized. It really doesn't have an urban zoning applied to it until you annex that property, which you did in 2022, and you applied your light industrial zone. So I'll talk a little bit about implementing the comprehensive plan and zoning code and how you will do this through your master plan development. The master plan development is a great tool because it encourages, it almost requires innovation. So you're gonna be expected to be thoughtful about how that entire 106 acres develops, not just the first 20-acre pad and then maybe the next one over there, and then, well, gosh, it'd be nice to have a trail or a road that connected those. You are going to effectively, upon application, and when an application is successful on that property, you're actually going to apply a zoning overlay, a master plan development overlay that amends your official zoning map so that the property owner and anybody, your staff, and you all knows that this property is subject to different rules. You can have more flexibility. And you can also have a higher bar, if you will, for expectations on what would happen with the property. And of course, you'll have some negotiations with the applicant during the public hearings, so that you can land on a development scheme that you all feel good about, that properly implements your vision, meets your code, and then allows the types of jobs to land there that you wouldn't see with warehousing or mini storage or things of that nature. So the master plan development, it recognizes the interrelatedness between buildings and open space and transportation options. And again, it helps you to avoid that piecemeal or fragmented approach to development, which is a lot easier to do. But in the end, just like we were talking about the state of Oregon, and we're playing the long game here. We're protecting farm and forest land, and we're giving up some economic opportunities on those natural resource lands in exchange for protecting, like in forest land, for example, forest fires, and on farmland, which often is flooded, helping people stay away from those areas, but still keeping those lands super productive, oftentimes really close to our urban centers. You can go to the next one. As I mentioned, your master plan development will be implemented through a zoning map overlay. And that zoning map overlay will provide the design controls and will offer some potential phasing if the developer, for example, is looking at 5 20-acre sites, or if it's just one big development, then phasing probably wouldn't happen. But you're set up really well to do phasing through your master plan development. I really like the way that your master plan development reads. It was really easy for me. I was a little afraid, Megan, because this is the best one I've worked with. The ones that I was working with in cities not to be named were challenging. I mean, they were not this straightforward. It's basically 3 steps to gain approval, so the developer can get out there and start pulling building permits. The first step is the plan development, zoning overlay and concept plan. And that's a great way to allow an applicant, a property owner, a developer to work with you to get that zoning overlay established. It's going to provide some sideboards, but really until you get into the second step, the detailed development plan, and type 3 next to that means, help me out, is that a planning commission decision? A type 3. So the type 4 review to establish the zoning overlay makes sense. It's an amendment to your official acknowledged zoning map, which means it has to go up to council. So the planning commission, you all would make a recommendation. It would go up to council. Council would hold a hearing, ratify it, maybe make changes, and then upon acknowledgement, your planner will create a zoning overlay that would be placed over that 106 acres. And then the third step is the subdivision plat or the site design review. And it's great that your code allows these steps to be consolidated, because if somebody comes in and they're just ready to go and they're like, well, we're well beyond the concept, we're ready to, turn a shovel, we've got a bird in hand, you can consolidate those steps. You just run it through your highest procedure, which is your type 4 procedure. So that's really, in my experience, the way I wish I would have written mine years ago. But it really lays out a path that makes sense. It's intuitive, and it really allows you a couple bites at the apple, if you will, during the concept plan. Hey, could we think about, for example, I know some of the neighbors in the county, when they learned about the urban growth boundary and they came and they testified, they were concerned about, wow, could we have a buffer or something? Well, sure. I saw the property owner, address that and met with them. And I think you would expect to see some consideration there to those property owners with some type of vegetative buffer or something like that. This process is set up really well to allow you to look at that and not be bound to your typical setbacks and building heights like you would in a standard zoning procedure or application. Again, all master plan developments are principled upon innovation. It does allow you to modify certain zoning and design standards. For example, you may want to see a greater setback to a natural vegetative buffer, and maybe in exchange you allow lesser setbacks in another area. And you can do that without variances. You could just do that as a function of your master plan development review. There are limitations, engineering, employment uses in residential zones. The big one here, the limitation would be that 20 acres. Like you can't, without changing the whole urban growth boundary, you really can't go below that 20 acre minimum. So that would be one that would be hard and fast. But there are many other aspects of your zoning code that you can really tailor to fit this development so that it does the job that you all would expect to implement your plan and code. So step 1, the first application that you would see, if it's not bundled with steps 2 and 3, but if it is, you would still see reference to this, I'm sure, in the staff report, would be an application to apply a master plan development overlay through the adoption of a concept plan. And the plan would include, and these are pulled from your ordinance, the objectives for the development, the proposed development, what the schedule looks like, a timeline, findings. Is this concept plan going to be able to meet the development code, the zoning code, and the development standards, so that you don't approve a plan and then you find that in order to implement the plan, you're running amok, if you will, of some zoning control. So you'll address that at the concept stage and really set up yourselves and the applicant for success at step 2 for the detailed step. During the concept plan, you can decide if there needs to be additional traffic studies, if there needs to be some noise abatements or attunement, are there geologic concerns, wetland mitigation, things of that nature will really come to the surface and give you a really a really flexible arena to have those conversations. Whereas when you're not in a master plan development, you're kind of stuck with the code, or you have to like apply for variances, and those, just the name of variances is like problematic for folks, and I get it. So you have a much, I think, more friendly approach to development review, and through your chair and your mayor, you're going to have some great opportunities to engage with the applicant on things that are important to you, representing your constituents, parts of the comprehensive plan and the community vision that you want to make sure is incorporated into this obviously really important property for Coburg and the region. More things that would be included in the first step of your master plan development: existing conditions. There would be a site review that would be conducted at that point. That would include a conceptual site plan. There'd be a grading concept plan along with landscaping, architectural, the signage, and then if there's any covenants, codes, and restrictions, private zoning that the applicant may choose because they may want to control their future tenants or the future owners out there, so that the businesses are symbiotic. So there's not sort of a business that doesn't fit in with all of them. You're going to have a great chance to have that conversation. Really none. Well, I mean, you can, you have some, because you can't.
If he puts them, the developer puts them in his application or in his plan.
Yeah.
And puts it in front of us.
Yeah.
We approve it, and we look at those CCRs as part of our approval process. You would think that there would be some sort of yes, responsibility of the developer to make sure those CCRs are carried through.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. A private property owner, well, I mean, you can record anything you want if you've got it on the right form and you pay the fees at the county clerk's office, but you can't use private zoning CCNRs to preempt or operate outside of local ordinances or state statutes. So you're right. If CCNRs are part of the application, you should look at those, and I know Megan will. You should kind of see what the developer is expecting of future tenants. I'd go so far as to say, if the applicant plans to apply CCNRs, that you should ask to see them. That you should, take a look. Let's make sure that everything that's being expected of the future either owners of those lots or tenants, leasers of those lots, is consistent with the master plan development. That's a really good question. CCNRs are tricky. They're because you asked about what's private zoning. Well, that's really private zoning, CCNRs, whereas your zones are public, they're publicly vetted. CCNRs aren't. I mean, they're drafted, in a dark room by attorneys, and they're all these real estate, terminology, but there are nuggets in those CCNRs that you'll want. There's pieces of those CCNRs that you're going to want to, take a look at. So that's a great point.
What does CCNR stand for?
Covenants, codes, and restrictions. Is that right? I'm pretty sure. I know it's covenants and restrictions. I think it's covenants, codes.
Covenant.
Yeah. And we often refer to them as private zoning.
Fact-finding type thing. They really shouldn't enter into a decision-making in our decision. If we have no say down the road about those particular, then can't make an approval on CNR. We're not back.
Right. You should expect to see in a CCNR language like all development needs to be consistent with the Coburg zoning code. All development needs to be consistent with the master plan development overlay. All development needs to be consistent with the detailed plan or the final site design review. That's the kind of stuff you should expect to see in those CCNRs. All the other things will probably, it would like control the areas that are leasable and the cost and those kind of things. But that's a great point. And something I would have completely glossed over if you didn't point that out. That is something that you can get high centered on. You can find things in CCNRs, in covenants. We saw them on the coast where properties were approved, and then in the CCNRs there were allowances for things to do beyond the statutory vegetation line, and lawyers figured that out. You have approval criteria for step one, the concept plan. You're going to look at your applicable comprehensive plan policies. You're going to look at your land division policies, land use standards, the light industrial zone, and the design standards that apply. And you do have a 20% minimum open space requirement in your master plan development. Once say if and when, but once the city approves step one, through your type 4 review, again, which means planning commission, public hearing, recommendation up to the city council, public hearing. That's right? Your council would hold a hearing. That's pretty typical. Yeah, the council would hold a hearing and then either approve if it's approved by ordinance, which then would result in an amendment to your zoning code. No, your zoning map.
And just, I looked it up real quick. The second C is conditions.
Oh, condition.
Covenants, conditions, and restrictions.
Thank you, Megan. So step 2, following the prospective approval of a concept plan and the zoning map overlay would be a detailed development plan. Your code asks for that to be applied for within a year of the concept plan, and then you can, I think, grant one extension. But the idea there is that the concept plan doesn't get stale, but your concept plan, step 1, it doesn't expire. So that master plan development, which is great in this case, because you have to use your master plan development because your ordinance requires it, the annexation, and ODOT's interchange management agreement requires it. So if those time periods were to expire, then you would necessarily need the applicant to come in with a new concept plan, or maybe just, freshen up the old one. But you've got some controls in there, so it just can't get stale on the vine for 5 or 10 years and then something happens and conditions have changed. So again, you've got a really nice ordinance. I found it pretty easy. I'm not the brightest guy, I'll admit. I found it pretty easy to go through and understand. So I like that very much. I list here some of the required contents of the detailed development plan and what you should expect to review at that second stage. So you should be looking at the final proposed location of all the lots. At that point, a surveyor has gone out there, done a preliminary plat, and laid out the open space tracts and the development parcels, rights of ways, if they are public rights of ways, or maybe they're private roadways with public easements, where the building envelopes are going to occur, and what natural features would be protected on the site, or if there's mitigation for wetlands, where that would occur. You would look at the subdivision preliminary plat. As you may know, subdivisions happen in 2 stages. A preliminary plat. Are your subdivisions type 3, Megan?
Yes.
They go to the planning commission. So they just very similar to that process. An applicant would come in, they'd show you what the proposed layout. You might tweak some of the lines, or you may say, hey, we don't like the density here. We really expected something different, or, we think the layout could be better. The natural resources could be accommodated in a different way if the lot lines were adjusted. So it's at that point, from the concept plan into this detailed plan where you'll nail that stuff down. And that's a type 3 review, your site design review and any other land use considerations. That'll be your decision. That'll be a planning commission decision to make. If it were appealed, it would go up to the council. But that second part, that detailed review is the planning commission decision.
Question, maybe it's for Megan. So at this point, is fire brought in, fire department brought in for review, and the police, instead of looking at layout and of the building, and for access for them, and
Yes, we actually engage with the fire district as well as the building official at a pre-application meeting, which is required for any type 3 land use application. So before the applicant even submits the official application, those major reviewers will have had their eyes on it and been able to provide feedback so that the applicant can submit something with a better understanding of the requirements and how to get a successful application. So yes, they will be involved from the very beginning.
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Megan. Okay, I think we move on. So continue on the decision-making criteria for the step 2, the detailed development plan. Upon finding that the plan conforms to the concept plan, conditions of approval is how it would be approved. Minor changes to the approved concept plan are allowed in your zoning code. They're like 10% change here and 5% change there. So there are some minor allowances, but at that point, that detailed development plan should reflect what you would expect to see develop out there. Following that approval, the third and final step is application for a site design review and subdivision final plat. Those approvals can only be made once appeal periods are exhausted, and once they are, building permits can be issued. And you have a streamlined review option. So just like at the outset, the 3 steps can be combined. You can combine all the elements in step 3 or all the elements in step 2 if the applicant's ready to go. In that regard, you can consolidate them and review the applications under a type 3 procedure if they're consolidated. What this references in a type 2 procedure is if in your detailed plan, you line out the phases. You say, okay, yep, phase 1 is going to be here. And then the applicant comes back in a couple of years for phase 2. They're within the timeline. They don't have to come to you then for that approval. It can be a staff level decision, a type 2 decision. So it's nice that you have a really high bar at the front end. You say you've got to take everything up to council. We want to make sure this concept plan, this master plan development is in line. It's got the proper sideboards. Then the planning commission will vet the detailed decision and a detailed plan. And then in the end, the site plan reviews and then like phasing and things could be accommodated even under a type 2 procedure, which is really nice to see because at that point, these plans have been well vetted. And as somebody who has consulted previously, it gives the property owner some assurance that they're not going to have to go back through public hearings and hear, about how they're going to, mess this up or mess that up, or what about this? And like, gosh, I just had these conversations 2 years ago and then 2 years prior. And so, again, you've got a really nice code. I think it's fair. I think it's appropriate that you have at the beginning stages a hearing both with the planning commission, then another hearing with the city council, and you're going to be able to. I mean, and at that stage, through your pre-application conference, your fire chief, your law enforcement, your utility providers are going to have a great chance at that first step to say, hey, be really nice if we had a turnaround up here, or it'd be better for us if we brought the water in this way. And then in the detailed plan, you nail that stuff down. That's it. So you feel ready to go? You're very welcome. Thank you.
When we first started looking at the, I guess they call them employment lands originally, and that was this land that we're talking about here across the way, as well as the highway commercial, all of employment land.
I remember talking to you, Commissioner Marshall, about those.
And there was quite a discussion over purity. How we can have development done so it does not put a lot of pressure upon our police department. Because we've ran into where that's inherently, that area becomes, and I'm talking about employment lands.
Yeah.
in general.
Yep.
Anyway,
Yep. No, I know where you're going. Yeah.
trying to figure out how we can put it in within code, but also within this master development plan, something that will take the burden and the pressure through development off our police, where they don't have to be there all the time.
Sure.
I don't know if that we are within the leeway of a master plan to be able to do something. Or the developer to look into that.
Well, I'll take a shot then, Megan, you may want to jump in here. So as planners, we are always thoughtful about lighting, access and circulation, not creating dark spots, especially in these industrial areas or inaccessible areas, so that our law enforcement can keep eyes on the street. That would be the starting point. You could absolutely, and Megan, I don't know if you've ever spent much time or gone to any sessions on like, they're like model codes, like what's a good approach to best practices, things to avoid. Really, you want to avoid those dark areas that are really inaccessible to law enforcement, but can be, access can be gained to sometimes unknowingly by property owners, fencing and things, using vegetative buffers, types of vegetation that's thorny and things. But I would take it a step further and say this might be something you could talk with the applicant and maybe see if they'd be willing to build into their CC&Rs. Private security, something like that. I would offer to you that is absolutely on the table. And I think completely appropriate for discussion in the frame of a master plan development. I think that's a great question, and that's the best way I can answer it. Do you have thoughts, Mike?
Having that discussion back.
Did you?
Somebody that came out of the state. The idea of that. Of course, I was going the route of requiring the developer to have their own private security.
Yeah.
I'm used to that.
Well, at minimum, I could say with confidence that you could ask your planner, and I can help with this, to bring best management practices to the table. As part of the staff report, we want to have we want to put this application through a public safety filter, through a lens of law enforcement. And I have seen cities, and I don't exactly know the legal mechanism here, but I have seen cities require when, for example, a Walmart or a big box store comes in, to provide funding so that they can expand their staff of law enforcement. We need another officer. The statistics show that for every 100,000 square foot of retail, there's going to be X number of shoplifters and car break-ins, and we need help with that. And because we don't have a sales tax, I think in Oregon, you have every right and reason to engage applicants, especially on these larger developments in that regard. I won't begin to say that I know all the legal ins and outs of how you get there. But there certainly are best practices that your staff can bring to you, and with your police chief and your law enforcement's expertise, you can avoid those sort of traps that we see sometimes in these industrial areas where, didn't realize that, there might be folks that could use that as, a camp or something. And, but for this open space that we dedicated and now we can't fence, we could secure this area. So things like that, think, to be thoughtful in that regard. I didn't ever really think about that. Certainly not during this presentation, but I think it's a great point. I mean, I really do. And the floor is yours. I want to like stop talking now and let y'all chat or ask any questions that you might have, but I'm happy to try to
So
answer anything or.
Patrick is saying he's happy to answer our questions. Are there any more questions? Any,
Yeah, I do. I'd like to go back to goal 12,
Okay,
transportation.
all right.
And we talked about this development, and I do know the state economic people came down and encouraged this city to go ahead and make this a light industrial area, and it's a perfect spot. We need to do this for the region and everything, for jobs. Problem is that people that will take on those jobs will not really reside in Coburg. They will reside where they can afford to live,
Sure.
which complicates the problem that Coburg has from a transportation standpoint, because everything gets funneled.
Yeah.
Right here.
And you're a major employer. You're one of the unique cities that has 3 times the jobs than employable people. It's amazing. So yeah, no, you're exactly right, Commissioner.
We get back to goal 12, and so we're in conflict.
Yeah.
We're in conflict for goal 12 because it's not flexible enough to allow us to build outside the urban growth, build a road outside the urban growth boundary for an urban need, in which this would be an urban need.
Yeah.
So I was hopeful that you were saying that, yeah, we're working on trying to make that a little bit, there's avenues that you can take. I was hopeful that you would told us that yeah, we're gonna look at goal 12 and make some changes to allow for keeping communities like ourselves livable without forcing and cramming traffic into it.
So
That's what goal 12 really does.
So you're right, Commissioner. This was a strategy that Megan and I had coming into this meeting, knowing that transportation is a huge issue. Would you like a couple of ODOT folks to come back to you at the time it's most convenient so we can have this conversation?
Fair to talk that.
Because I've queued up a couple of ODOT staff. You probably saw a few of them, Madam Mayor, today. They were going to be part of this presentation, but we felt like it would just steal the thunder of the zoning work that you have at hand. But I am ready to give my colleagues a call. We could not only engage ODOT, but I could cover this too, but I could get one of our natural resource specialists to talk about the farmland and what the goal exception would look like to build an urban facility outside the urban growth boundary. I mean, we've talked about it quite a bit. I'm pretty easy to convince because I've been a city planner. I've been an elected official up on the North Coast. I've sat in some of your chairs, and I feel like we need to give cities the tools necessary to be successful. And when I see, for example, the city of Millersburg getting scrutinized for, or Lynn County it would be, scrutinized for this access road that was planned and designed by the city engineer, who happens to be the deputy city manager. This is not just a pie in the sky type of proposal. This is well vetted, and the alternatives were exhausted. There's a river there, there's topography, and there was just no way in my judgment that this particular road was going to get built inside the city, or the city was going to have to expand its urban growth boundary, bring in farmland in between the road. And so they took the narrowest path possible. And it's well, we'll see if it gets approved or not, but a goal exception is possible. We have precedent. There's a road that I know of outside of Pendleton that was built through this process, and Lynn County's taking a run at it now. So it was deliberate not to bring it up during this presentation. But we will come back.
But I think it would be extremely helpful to have the resource people, the ODOT.
Let's
have
do it.
This conversation, and I think it's very interesting to wait and see, you know, what is going to happen with the Lynn County exception, the variance.
Yeah.
That will be very telling, but I think you're absolutely right, Commissioner Marshall. And it was one of the topics at the Joint Commission on Transportation today is, you know, you've got to include local authorities, cities, counties in this planning. You can't do it. You can't do it in silos. You absolutely cannot. And there are ripple effects, that unintended consequences sometimes, and we need to address those.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That's really well said.
Are you
Are
sure?
you? I don't know. I know you, Commissioner. But yeah, you just give me the word, or Megan, you give me the word that, you know, you'd like to have a conversation on transportation planning. We can focus in on the interchange. We can make part of the conversation interchange focused, part of it regional transportation planning. And I think that would be a great use of an hour and a half. I think it'd be fantastic.
I guess I will. Transportation system plan, how critical are they to, is it to like the city of Groveland? Because we're not of the size required.
Well, I know your mayor knows the answer to this. They're super important. Like, the only way to get your projects queued up for funding is to have an adopted, acknowledged transportation system plan, and then go through the process of getting your projects vetted through the Area Commission on Transportation, and then elevated up to the Joint Commission on I'm probably not getting that exactly right, but into the State Transportation Improvement Program, the STIP, that ODOT pushes out every 3 years. That then aligns the funding for your project. So they're very important.
It's not required. You're absolutely right. Because of our size, it's not required, but we have one. It needs to be updated, and we need to move it forward for good reason.
Thanks.
Other questions or comments?
I have, I'll let the plan commissioners go first, but I have a question and maybe more of a comment. Question / comment. So my first question would be, this is just kind of geared toward people that maybe been on the commission a long time, but haven't really experienced this kind of situation, and just trying to understand what the standard practice is. So on occasion, our staff might interpret a certain section of our code to mean one thing. We might have one or more commissioners that might look at those same words in the code, but interpret it a different way.
Mhm.
And it could have different implications for an applicant. You know, maybe one reading of the code might say, oh, this application is in compliance with this particular section of the code.
Right.
The other point of view might say, no, the way I read it, it's out of compliance. If you have a commissioner who isn't sure what to do with that, maybe they receive a staff report for an upcoming meeting, and they feel that, hey, I've got a difference of opinion with the staff on how to interpret this part of the code. What is the standard practice? What do you recommend that person does to move forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's assume it's through a quasi judicial public hearing, which means you're sort of like judges. Planning commissioners are instructed, just like Commissioner Buck was not going to talk to you, Madam Mayor, about that issue that she is effectively a judge upon. You ask your staff. There's no what we call ex parte contacts, which means a communication outside of the formal record that doesn't exist with your communications with staff. If as a commissioner, you've got questions, you've got concerns, and trust me, I've worked with plenty of commissions that disagreed with my proposed findings, to the point where at one point my boss didn't let us make recommendations anymore. So we just, yeah, we would just, lay out our proposed findings, and at the end, we wouldn't make a recommendation, which I didn't like that particular job because I felt like I left my decision makers hanging. It was really incumbent upon the individual commissioners in that particular case to really query the staff before the hearing. And then after the hearing, if there's been a continuance or something, really use your staff to your advantage to try to settle yourself on where you lie in this spectrum of opinions that we all live and work in. I mean, it's completely understandable. I mean, I know you've got a good chair and you've got a great mayor, and it's very helpful. And I recall Mayor Smith, and I haven't been in the chamber since his passing, and Ray ran a good meeting, and so you're in good hands. And so rely on your chair as a commissioner. If you feel like you're just not getting the information, ask the chair, could we push the pause button here? Can we continue this hearing for a couple weeks or a month until our next scheduled meeting? As long as you announce the date, time, and place of the next meeting during continuance, you don't have to re-advertise. The applicant might not be happy sometimes, but take the time that you need that's necessary. And Megan, I'm trying to think if the 120-day rule would apply to so cities are required to make a land use decision and exhaust all appeals within 120 days because the first stage is a type 4 review. I'll get back to you on this. Yeah, right. So I think you have as much time as you feel necessary to get that concept plan right. Then you would be subject to the 120-day rule for the detailed plan review and the subsequent reviews. But that would be my advice. Use your staff, and then if things come up during a hearing, really let the chair, let the mayor know, if you're a counselor, that you really need more time, or we need a break. I need a chance to really review this new information that's come in. That's the way I would approach that.
And so, thank you. And so I think 99% of the time, I served on the planning commission for a long time, and 99% of the time we agreed with what the staff opinion was, but there are times when
Oh, it'd be amazing.
maybe we don't. And so let's say the staff report is written that, this applicant meets these criteria, and therefore, the application should be approved. And let's say you have a commissioner that just feels strongly like, I don't agree with the way the staff has interpreted this particular part of the code. And that maybe that commissioner wants to introduce a different decision to the planning commission. Can you this doesn't really have to do with master plan developments versus regular code. I'm just in general.
Yeah.
I know the answer, but I want to just kind of make sure everybody understands what would be the process that person needs to go through. Maybe they've talked to the staff and before the meeting, and they still don't really come to an agreement. They come to the planning commission meeting. Maybe they want to suggest a different decision than maybe the staff has recommended. What do they do during the meeting to make that happen? Like I say, I haven't seen it happen very often in Coburg, but occasionally it might come up. So what are they supposed to do?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I've seen plenty of planning commissioners and elected officials disagree with findings, disagree with conditions of approval. You would build it into your motion. You would make a motion, or you would, if somebody else makes a motion and it doesn't accommodate what you think is right, if the motion is seconded during discussion, you'd say, you know, I'm not going to be able to support this because I really need a carve out here. These conditions are too onerous, or this finding, I just disagree that, for example, this wetland has been protected adequately. You know, it's got a road next to it, and so I want to see a buffer around that entire wetland. So, you know, with respect to my colleagues, I'm probably not going to vote for this because I disagree with this finding. And then maybe at that point, the chair, the mayor would say, okay, you know, we've got a motion and a second, and you take the vote, and if your colleagues, your peers agree with you, then even agree with you enough, even though they want to see the motion pass, that they'll vote against it to give you an opportunity then to make that motion and say, oh, I'll make a motion, but this is going to exclude finding 16, or I want to change finding number 16 to read this way. And then condition of approval 4 should be deleted. And then you make a motion along those lines, and you just see if you get a second, which will be great, because then you can have discussion, and then that's sort of the due process and democracy at work at that point.
I think we did that with the Wykert subdivision, that the findings were that Skinner Road was acceptable egress access into the subdivision. And it went to city council, and the council did not approve the planner's findings. Is that correct?
That was an appeal.
It was an appeal, yeah. And then the developer sort of withdrew and split it into 2 pieces. I mean, the developer could see where council and planning commission were headed, and so sort of was a good developer. Did a nice job in backing up and making sure that there were other options. But that's a great, you're right, that's a great analogy. Exactly what we did. That was an appeal, but it does lend itself to the discussion phase. And thank you, Councilor Engebretson, for bringing that up. That's exactly the process that should have. It should come, okay, but here's why I can't support that. And then that creates that space for all of the other participants on that committee, council, commission, to sort of go, well, now wait a minute, I didn't think about it in that way. Let's work this through. It's, in my opinion, that's how that should.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I will say that a big part of this presentation that I normally do, those slides are hidden because I wanted to allow time to focus on your master plan development. But I could come back. Those slides are like the purpose of good findings, what's ex parte contact, bias, quasi judicial versus legislative, that kind of stuff. There's a prepackaged slides. Megan has them, and I'd be happy to you know, engage you all in that kind of conversation as well.
Ongoing education.
If anybody's indulgent, I'd like to go back 2 years, when we were working on our UGB. I remember this is when I was on the council. When was that? UGB, I got kicked out.
2014.
Thank you. And we thought, you know, we had a pretty good rationale of what we wanted to do. In fact, and obviously it was taking farmland, putting it back, putting it in our UGB. So it's better, but the alternative was to take Stalling Lane, take the marginal stuff.
Yeah.
No, no, you could have this, but you can't have that. And then it, you know, it blew it all apart, and there was a whole lot of money spent on it to get it to that number. And it was just frustrating because I think at the time we felt we had a good argument. Basically just coming down to a walk of the city, that's what we wanted.
Right.
Lane, not included as far as how do you battle that? I don't know how, if you go back with the same thought process, we're gonna get the same reaction probably. So how-
You are going to get a much different reaction from the Department of Land Conservation Development this go around. I've gone through those records. I was aware of these issues because I was with DLCD on the North Coast when your DLCD rep was bringing the Coburg UGB amendment up at staff meetings. You ask about like, if you interpret things differently, I interpret the priority schedule under Goal 14 urbanization probably differently or through a different lens than perhaps my predecessors did and even others in the department to this day do. We have a priority schedule for lands to be brought into the urban growth boundary. This is exactly what you're talking. Rural residential lands are exception lands. Those are supposed to come in first. And then down the chain is your exclusive farm use. Where does walkability come in? Where does community character come in? Where does building a compact, efficient city come in? Well, for me, that allows lower priority lands to jump the queue. And I refuse to be told or believe that jumping the queue is unacceptable, because I helped lead Adair Village down this exact same path. And the city of Adair Village amended their UGB. They brought in the land that they needed to bring in so that they could loop their water lines, so they could build continuous streets and infrastructure. And what I made sure happened beforehand was the city had comprehensive plan policies that promoted a walkable community. They had a comprehensive plan policy that discouraged development on the west side of Highway 99. There were some key policies that the city was able to hang their hat on and say, you know, we appreciate the state's priority schedule, but doesn't say anywhere in Goal 14 or in the state that these lands can't be brought in. You just have to vet the higher priority lands and then through that alternatives analysis, make a decision consistent with the walkability standards in your comprehensive plan that those are more important. Like, we want to be a functional city. We want to actually be able to pay for our infrastructure, not send these dead end lines up Stalling Lane and other things. I think it was unfortunate. I actually learned quite a bit from your experience in 2014 being a planner up on the North Coast. And when I came to this region, I basically brought a mindset that I've shared with you previously, that I'm going to be an advocate for my cities and counties. But I'm going to work with you and for you. And if that means that I have to, and that's how I was hired at the department 12 years ago by Director Rue at the time. I said, I'm not the guy that's going to be bringing in the rule book and, you know, shaking down the cities and counties to have to adhere to statutes. No, I'm going to work from their comprehensive plan. I'm going to work from the ground up. That's the only way I know how to work. And I was hired, and I'm not going to change. So you will see a different perspective, and you will get my support for any urban growth boundary amendment that promotes compact, walkable, efficient delivery of public facilities. And let me work with my colleagues that maybe have a different viewpoint, and I'll make sure that my manager and our director is engaged as they need to be, so that you guys can execute the plans that. I mean, all you gotta do is walk around town for 5-10 minutes, and you know this is a special place. And I will advocate for you every day of the week to help you continue the path that you've so well laid. And yeah, you'll see a different experience the next time you do a UGB amendment for residential lands.
Sure, Bill, I could blow a map up real quick. Pass it on. Thank you. Thank you.
You bet. You bet. Now, you know, I will say, you know, I'll work with my colleagues. There are plenty of interested parties, environmental advocates, other, you know, interest groups that I can't control. That's going to be, you know, part of your and your staff's job to, you know, engage those folks early in the process. And when you hear things from interested parties or other groups that say, oh, the state won't let you do that, come talk to me. You know, let's actually see if that's true.
Other questions, concerns?
Also just quickly kind of
Let me turn this on. I was just wondering if you could quickly sort of high level, just make sure we're all familiar. Also, something I noticed sometimes with newer planning commissioners is they're not clear on, and I don't, some of you may have been here a long time and I'm not trying to say that you don't know this, but there might be people listening that aren't familiar with this and would just like to know. So what are the main differences between our going through a master plan development process versus not having a master plan development process? I mean, I mean, it is really kind of easy. One of them is the master plan process is one route that a developer might be required to go, or in some cases in our code can choose to go. But if they don't go that route, then they go the regular code route.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you can guess what I'm getting at, what the main difference between those two routes is.
Well, I'll try to answer it, and I don't know if I do, but I would expect you'd see a partition. And the partition rules would apply, and you can just ignore lands that aren't part of the partition. Or let's say, for example, on this 100 acres, you get a 20 acre, you get a 2 parcel partition, 20 acres and the 80 acres. The applicant would probably say, well, the 80 acres, we're gonna worry about that down the road, but we're just gonna focus on these 20 acres, how to serve these 20 acres. And then maybe that 20 acres gets fenced off, and then the next land would come in and you'd end up with potentially some piecemeal development. Because I didn't look at your land division code, but your partition ordinance is probably like a couple pages and very like rote about like street standards and utilities, and doesn't offer flexibility except through variance procedures. And then you end up with multiple land use decisions. And so that's one of the benefits of the master plan development is it requires you to look at that property cohesively. Say that again, Commissioner.
Expedient for the developer to go through a master plan development versus piece by piece.
Well, if by expedient mean fast, I would say
Easier. Get what wants done in a timely manner versus doing the piecemeal, like you said, and then wait and do the time involved.
I think it's better for everybody. I would offer, though, it's a little bit of go slow to go fast. I mean, you're going to ask for a lot of information that you would never ask for a concept plan in a partition. They just have a surveyor go out there, draw some lines on the field wherever the lines are arbitrarily. That's what you get. You're not going to have that with the master plan development. You're going to look at these buildings, you look at the orientation, the relationship between these buildings, what some interested parties have to say about, buffers and stuff like that. And then you'll let that inform where those lot lines may or may not go. You wouldn't have that ability through a partition. But it does ask for more information up front, no doubt. Again, having been a consultant, having represented applicants at hearings, I think your ordinance is just spot on. It doesn't ask for anything extraneous, and it's very clear what the decision-making path is and what the criteria is, which is really important. And in partitions, it's just about dividing land and allowing land to be sold to a different owner. That's really the point of land divisions. It unfortunately is used to then promulgate development that follows, and that's why we see these odd flag lots and things that are difficult to build on, because you can do them through a partition process. You can absolutely say no to a flag lot during the master plan development process.
Last call. Let's adjourn the meeting then. Thank you, Patrick.
I was just gonna ask, are you involved with ADUs as well?
I can be.